Remember Y2K, when we thought the world was going to end because of computers? We barely survived that one, but in the aftermath, a bigger worry for me was that I didn't know where my career was headed. I was 25, had been out of college for a few years, and was ready for a change. I had a job as a reporter at the Riverside Press Enterprise. It was a good job, and I'd had it for a number of years. Most of the time I covered high school and college sports and minor league baseball, but my ultimate goal was to cover Major League Baseball. They'd given me a taste of it, like on off days for the regular beat writers, but I saw no path to my goal of covering baseball full-time. So in the spring of 2000, I applied for jobs teaching English abroad. I bought a book on Amazon, and after a series of emails and calls, since the internet was still a baby at this point, I was offered positions in Ecuador, Morocco, and Japan. Japan seemed like the best choice of the three, even though I had no long-standing interest in anime or sushi or sake or really any part of Japanese culture. I was hired by AEON, a language school with 270 branches stretching from one end of Japan to the other. I spent the months between the time I was hired in the spring and when I'd be leaving at the end of summer hanging out with my friends. There were barbecues at the beach. There were fireworks on the 4th of July. And finally, there was a big going away party at Chameau Park in Riverside. I'd packed up or given away all the stuff in my apartment. Look at all those boxes behind my newspaper friends. I sold my car to my friend Delon, and then, just like that, it was time to go. My friends and family came to LAX to see me off. And since this was a year before 9/11, they were able to accompany me right up to the gate as I prepared to board my non-stop Northwest Airlines flight to Osaka. I didn't know how long I'd be gone. My contract was for a year, but AEON said teachers usually extended their contracts. That's my mom, who's double-checking that I brought a jacket with me for my year plus in Japan. Despite knowing 6 months ahead of time when I'd be leaving, I'd learned very little Japanese. My mom would always ask me if I'd started studying yet, and I'd tell her there was still plenty of time. That morning at the airport, I told her I'd study on the plane. I had a few phrase books with me, but I hardly ended up needing them, since once I got there, they could somehow tell that I was not a Japanese person. I was nervous. I was excited. I knew it was going to be epic, and it was. Still, it was hard leaving everyone behind for who knows how long as I walked down the jet bridge towards the flight, which would take 12 and a half hours to fly me 5,742 miles across the Pacific towards whatever adventure awaited me. After landing in Osaka, I took the bullet train to Okayama, AEON's headquarters. We started training to be teachers the next morning, jet lag be damned. The other teachers training with me were Sarah from Arizona, Amanda from St. Louis, Jason from Kansas City, and Olga from Toronto. It was the first time in my life I'd worn a suit. I cut quite a figure, looking super beefy and all, in my formal attire. The AEON trainers put us through the paces right away, telling us how to do the pre-made lessons and warning us that there would be uncomfortable pauses, like longer than you could possibly expect, when you posed a question to Japanese students, because they like to get everything absolutely correct. I had a great week learning AEON stuff with my new friends during the day and going around with them at night. Everything was new to us. None of us had been to Japan before. Even 7-Eleven was new and exciting. We found a store in Okayama that seemed like it was meant for me, but surprise, like everywhere else, they didn't carry any clothes even close to my size.
We'll never feel bad anymore.
Jason didn't go out with us that much, so it was pretty much me and these lovely ladies running around Okayama. This is a common theme of my time in Japan, spending lots of time with females. I didn't mind. We studied our lesson plans a lot. Learning everything and planning our lessons ended up being pretty stressful. I mean, the people were just sitting there staring at us while they would think up answers, and who would have known that Japanese schoolgirls could have been so scary when they did it?
Ben,
Yes?
your thoughts on training?
I thought it was wasabi
This is the only beer
and
in
kung fu, and I thought it was very genki.
And so, are you feeling genki about teaching?
I'm feeling a little genki under the armpits.
Do you think
right
you're going
now.
to be a genki teacher, Ben?
I'm going to be the genkiest damn teacher you ever did. We're here in Okayama Station. The game we're going to play is let's introduce ourselves to various Japanese people. Since none of us had bothered to learn Japanese prior to our arrival, we went out on a handful of evenings and practiced our phrasebook Japanese on people in the shopping mall underneath Okayama Station. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Watashi wa Ben desu. Oname wa? No? Hi. Bye. Well, I don't know. How can they walk? After a week, training was over. The Eon people gave us bullet train tickets to our new hometowns. Jason and Olga were going to be in Osaka. I never saw them again. Amanda and Sarah were stationed down near where I was going to be, in a town near Hiroshima called Iwakuni. They'd only be a short train ride away, so we made plans to meet up on the weekends. My position teaching conversational English was in Iwakuni, a suburb of Hiroshima. It was a nice enough mid-sized city, not too big, not too small, mellow weather. My office was in downtown Iwakuni, across from the train station. We were on the 7th and 8th floors of the Mitsukanya building.
Shoots up through the stony ground. There's no room.
The first floor was a restaurant run by a former sumo wrestler. He and I soon developed a greeting wherein we'd bounce our bellies together, much to the delight of any students or anyone else really who happened to be walking by.
And the reason that you had to care, the traffic is stuck.
When I got there, Philip was the only other foreign teacher. He was from Dublin and liked to say that he was the embodiment of every bad Irish drinking stereotype. Kimiko was the branch manager, my boss. She was the shortest boss I've ever had, and I'm sure I was the tallest employee she ever had, but we still made quite a duet on karaoke nights. Yuko was the assistant manager and was constantly riding her bike around town to stuff flyers in mailboxes and paste Eon posters on any available empty surface. She helped me get my cell phone. I hadn't known that the bright red model I chose was a girl phone, but she and Kimiko let me know. Tomoko taught little kids and was quite diminutive, but she sang karaoke like a Viking princess in an opera. Her desk was next to mine and I liked to sing, Tomoko lunch, just to hear her surprisingly hearty laugh. Yukiko was married to an American guy named Rob, who was a technical sergeant on the US Marine Corps base on the edge of town. I became very close with them and their daughter. Rob and Yukiko would often take me onto the base to get stuff I couldn't find in Iwakuni, like peanut butter or American magazines or Mexican food. My job involved teaching all sorts of English phrases to housewives, college students, businessmen, high school kids, and little kids. Sometimes it was stuff like what to say when buying a movie ticket. I'd like a ticket for the matinee, please. And sometimes it was stuff like what to say if you were in an English-speaking country and your friend's pet died. I'm so sorry for your loss. You have my condolences. I worked from 1 to 9, 5 days a week, with Sundays and Mondays off. This was pretty sweet because it meant I didn't have to get up early for work, and we finished up in time to go out at night. The students liked taking the teachers out because there was more chances to study English conversation, but it seems like usually they just end up wanting to know slang and cool jive handshakes.
See the world in green and blue. See China right in front of you. See the canyons.
Eon set me up in a little studio apartment that was a 10-minute walk from the office. It was a 4th floor walk-up, so my legs got real strong. It overlooked a parking lot, and I set about decorating it with photos I'd brought with me, plus a bunch of books and CDs I'd shipped ahead. This is before you could have books and music travel with you digitally. My place felt pretty homey really quickly. I made these cool posters to help me learn katakana, one of Japanese's 3 sets of written characters. It's used for words borrowed from other languages, and I got pretty good at it pretty quickly. One disadvantage of Japanese homes is that beds are not totally common. With the help of Yuko and Kimiko, I was able to obtain a bed. I figured that even if I only used it for a year, it was worth it, and would be far better than sleeping on a futon on the ground that I'd have to roll up and stow away every morning. My bathroom was comedically small. It had a bidet toilet that with my big American thighs would accidentally set off the first handful of times I sat down to do my business, until I figured out how to sit down with a slight lean to the left. Philip left to return to the green pastures of Ireland after I'd been in Iwakuni for a couple months. He was replaced by Katie, who lived in the Bay Area. I taught her everything she needed to know to work at Eon in Iwakuni.
I can't do it now.
Come on! You should have seen it maybe 10 seconds ago. It was so cool.
Continue.
Go on. At first, I called the apartment the Embassy. Like, do you want to come hang out at the Embassy and watch a movie or something?
No one told you life was gonna be this way.
But I soon changed that to a better name and began referring to my place as the Hotel California.
When you're lost in the rain in Juarez, when it's Easter time too.
Doing laundry was a chore. The combo washer-dryer only worked for a few pieces of my big old clothes at a time, so I had to dry stuff on a rack and a clothesline. One day, in the snowy wind, a pair of my underwear got blown under the roof of a nearby building, where they remained for the rest of my stay in Japan, and who knows how long after that. I'd arrived in Japan with a healthy and long-standing dislike of all things seafood-related, and my time spent there did nothing to diminish this in any way. Eating was never much of an issue, however, even though everyone else seemed to eat seafood items that were based on a dare at pretty much every meal.
Please tell her thanks a lot.
Even though there was plenty of food that was not to my liking, I survived. I learned phrases like sakana ga kirai, which means I don't like fish. I figured out what I did like to eat in different restaurants we'd go to. I ordered it every time, and I never had a problem.
To get up and take another shot. And my best friend, my doctor, won't even say what it is.
I bought groceries every couple days at Fuji Grand, a 10-story department store a few blocks away. I had to go all the time because they didn't sell bulk anything, and I wouldn't have had storage space in my small-ass apartment anyways. I cooked lots of chicken and rice and fresh vegetables, and tried to make tacos when I could get salsa and tortillas from the base. Fun story. I'd been in Japan for almost a year and was at a festival when I saw what I thought was a corn dog stand. I was so happy I was nearly crying as I ordered one. My tears turned to those of despair as I bit through the crusty golden casing, however, and found inside not a hot dog but an octopus tentacle. I guess I should have studied my Japanese more. Mom was right. The number one tourist attraction in Iwakuni is Kintai Bridge on the far side of the city from where I lived. It was a half-hour bicycle ride, but I went there often because it was beautiful. This arched bridge had been around since samurai times, and you could cross it and go up the ropeway to the castle and all that sort of stuff.
To be what they claim. If you're looking to get silly, you better go back to from where you came. Because the cops don't need you, and man, they expect the same.
Japan's big on cherry blossoms, like they count on their arrival and northward progress in the spring on the evening news. We had some pretty cool parties at Kintai Bridge in March, when the cherry blossoms were doing their thing.
Sergeant at arms into leaving his post. And picking up Angel who just arrived here.
The Perrys had me and Katie over to babysit AJ, their then toddler daughter, a handful of times. We were happy to do so because their house was way warmer than our apartments, and they'd bring us pizza from the base. We also had Thanksgiving with the Perrys. Me, both years I was there for November. Rob deep-fried a turkey in the backyard, but I passed on the deep-fried eel. And Rob took Katie and me fishing at this campground that his friend ran in the mountains above Hiroshima. I had no knowledge of or interest in fishing, but I was always up for new experiences, and it was fun hanging out, listening as Hideki played Simon and Garfunkel and Beatles and Bob Dylan songs on his guitar. Bob and Yukiko had everybody over to their house again to celebrate Christmas. They're really good people. They made my Christmas there on the other side of the world not lonely. Christmas afternoon, we drove back up to the lake, and I saw snow like I'd never seen before in my life. Isn't it cool, though, how not even waist-deep snow can stop Japanese vending machines, even out in the middle of the forest? So something cool was the way you pay your bills in Japan. Even though this was way back in the first years of the century, they already had it set up where you'd just go to a convenience store, scan them, and pay them. Easy peasy. I paid mine at the Lawson store around the corner from the Hotel California. The machines looked difficult to use being in Japanese, which I still hadn't learned, but there was a button to translate the screen to English. Lawson's was great because, like all Japanese convenience stores, they had all sorts of crazy, cheap, delicious foods. I was particularly partial to the egg sandwiches. I even bought concert tickets there from the machine, without any stupid Ticketmaster convenience fees, despite this being the most convenient way possible to buy a concert ticket. Eon threw a big old Christmas party for the staff and students. This is where Katie and I world premiered our version of Romeo and Juliet in Japanese, which we cobbled together with our phrasebooks and help from our coworkers, since online translation was not even close to being a thing at that point. The play was a big hit.
Konnichiwa.
Koko no koku ni yoku kuru no? Everyone just loved the falling in love montage that we'd filmed at a park near the Hotel California a week earlier.
Why do birds suddenly appear every time you are near? Just like me, they long to be close to you. Why do stars fall down from the sky every time you walk by? Just like me, they long to be close to you. On the day that you
40 minutes by local train from Iwakuni Station was Hiroshima. You can't mention the city without knowing what happened there in 1945. The museum is intense, the mood is somber, and I've been all around the world and nowhere else has ever felt as haunted as the Peace Memorial Park, above which the bomb exploded at the end of World War II. It was weird though. Every time I went to the Peace Memorial Park at the museum, I was always the biggest attraction there. Hiroshima is also where I went to a bunch of baseball games. I became a fan of the Hiroshima Carp as they competed for the Central League title. The games were a blast. Each player on the Carp had his own special song for when he batted. There were special songs for different times in the game. I told Amanda that we were sitting right behind the Japanese version of the Unabomber. And the 7th inning stretch, I don't even know how to tell you about it, so I'm just going to show you. Next bunch of months, basically the start of 2001 until the middle of the year, was just a series of days spent working, hanging out in the Hotel California, and having a good time. Here's a montage of some stuff that happened. Katie and I met up with Amanda and Sarah one weekend in a historic old town called Suwano for some rainy sightseeing. Random kids high-fiving and handshaking with me on a train was not an uncommon sight to behold. Miyajima Island was a super scenic place to visit, just a short train and ferry trip from the Hotel California. There are wild deer roaming all over the island. This is Kumi, another one of my coworkers. This was another trip to Miyajima with students and coworkers. This time it was for the Miyajima Oyster Festival. I sat out those festivities and hung out instead with the Miss Miyajima contestants. Everyone but me got sick, by the way. Katie got to use her Japan-provided health insurance for a hospital visit. We were always going out to karaoke. It's not like America. In Japan, it's just you and however many people are with you in a room for that many people. You don't sing in front of a bunch of drunks at Red Lobster or anything. It's more fun and intimate. Who are dressed up for the holiday today, which is what holiday? Yep, that's it. Do you have a boyfriend? Oh, no. In March, Amanda and I took an overnight ferry to Busan, Korea. We saw some temples and whatnot, but the real fun was on the way there and the way back. On the way there, we talked a bunch with a Korean guy named King, who, for lack of a better word, latched onto us. He offered to let us sleep in his room instead of in our designated spots on the floor in second class. We passed, despite him asking us many times and assuring Amanda that there would be no sexual harassment while I was sleeping on the floor. King took a whole morning off work and accompanied us around Busan, and then insisted on booking us into rooms 903 and 905 on a new hotel, different than the one we'd chosen. The fire escape was just a hammer to break the windows and a rope you'd throw out the window to get yourself down. It was dark and stormy after a day of looking at temples, and in room 904, between our rooms, Amanda and I could hear what sounded like a Russian orgy going on. Then King kept drunk calling us in our rooms all throughout the night. It might have just been that King was socially awkward, but whatever, he really freaked us out. We spent a good chunk of our last day in Korea before the night ferry home just hanging out in the hotel's lush, tropical atrium. On the way home, after karaokeing to Japanese and Korean grandparents, we spent most of the overnight trip talking to a Norwegian guy who lived in Japan. We dubbed him Hans because we never found out his real name. Hans had been traveling the world for decades, so he had advice on every possible place we imagined we might ever want to go to. Hans had applied to Eon, but they turned him down. In the decade since, he'd opened 4 branches of his own language school in Shimonoseki, where his Japanese wife and 3 Norwegian-Japanese supermodel-looking daughters all worked. He had pictures of them in his wallet and gave us a brochure, but I lost it. Overall, it was quite a 3-day trip to Korea, even if I don't have any video to share. Somewhere around the time the weather started warming up again, like around March or April, I took notice of my neighbors in the building next to the Hotel California. I couldn't help but notice them. They were a bunch of spirited and beautiful young ladies from China, from Southeast Asia, and from Russia and Eastern Europe, who had all come to Japan to work as hostess club girls. This meant that they worked in clubs where Japanese businessmen went at night to drink, to relax, and to continue doing business. The hostess club girls wore fancy dresses, sang songs, laughed at the businessmen's bad jokes, and made sure their glasses were never empty. I wasn't allowed inside the clubs on my own, but students took me a few times. And when I started seeing the hostess club girls hanging out on the balcony not far from my balcony, I made it my mission to get them to come over. It didn't end up being that difficult. I'd like to think it was my boyish good looks that did the trick, but it was probably really a mixture of my offers of free ice cream and English lessons, and a general sense of curiosity on their part. I became fast friends with a group of Filipinas and a group of Indonesians. That soon became just the Indonesians, and before long just one particular Indonesian, but that's a story for another time. When I wasn't at work, it seemed like I was spending all my time with these girls, which wasn't the worst thing in the world. I even snuck over the divide between our apartments and into Shangri-La, where they lived, and hung out with them in their apartment one afternoon, which would have probably been very problematic if their Yakuza bosses had gotten wind that I was there. But they didn't, and my visit was great. As the summer went on, and I neared the completion of my year-long contract with Eon, I was asked if I would like to stay for longer. Another option given to me was to move to Okayama to work at the headquarters, writing textbooks, because I guess I'd shown a lot of creativity in the lessons I presented. This was an honor, but I considered it for only about a split second. I had dodged a bullet in Iwakuni somewhat, in that my branch may have been the only branch around where I could get away with not wearing a suit every day. Kimiko was fine with me teaching in just a dress shirt and tie, and I even wore my Doc Martens to work most days. Going to Eon corporate offices might have been a blast, but it would have been a typically formal Japanese atmosphere. I extended my contract through the end of the year, meaning I would return to America at the holidays. Of course, as soon as I'd set a date for me to go home, things began to develop in earnest with one of my Indonesian hostess club friends, and we spent the rest of the summer, the fall, and the early part of winter counting down the days until our inevitable separation. So that sucked. My time with my Indonesian friends was interrupted in July by a trip that Amanda and I had planned after our fun springtime trip to Korea. She would be headed home after her year-long contract expired in September.
My favorite thing in Japan are probably when you go to a video store and you go to the new release section, and there's like the new release, the new Disney release, and right next to it's the new pornographic release.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
That's cool.
We'll be back later with more. We figured it wasn't hot and humid enough in Japan, so we flew to Thailand. Bangkok was like no place I'd ever seen. It was a non-stop party going on, all hours, every day of the week. And there were elephants wandering around the streets in the middle of the night. We went on a river cruise where they told us to make sure not to get any water in our mouths. We saw temples and watts and other fun stuff. We bargained for everything. I got bored with this and started trying to buy this vendor's calculator for a good price. I almost caused a group of showgirls to be late for their performance at a kickboxing arena. All in all, we had a great 5 days in Thailand before heading to Nepal, way up in the Himalayas. Nepal was somewhat reeling from a murderous rampage that had happened a few months earlier when a prince murdered the king and queen. We saw these famous dancing Indian midgets at dinner our first night. I could have gone home happy after that, but there was more. We went to temples, and many of the monks giggled as they rubbed my Buddha-like belly. We saw bodies burning on funeral pyres in a holy river that flows into the sacred Ganges River in India.
Smoky mist up to the stratosphere. Too low to find my way, too high to wonder why. I've touched this place before, somewhere in another time. Now I can hear the sun, the clouds drifting through the blind.
We took a flight around Mount Everest, and since 9/11 wouldn't happen for another month or so, we all took turns going up to the cockpit to chat with the pilots. Don't you love how this trip took place in the early days of digital media? So I flew around frickin' Mount Everest and took a handful of footage and like 2 pictures of it, since storage space was expensive and not easy to obtain back in 2001. Alas, this marked the end of my adventures with Amanda, for the time being, because her contract was up and she went home soon after we got back to Japan. When 9/11 happened, my students and coworkers checked up on me and Katie quite often to see how we were doing. It was weird that we couldn't have flown home if we needed to. The base was on lockdown, so I didn't see Rob or any Marines around town for like a month. I had a trip planned to Tokyo. It was weird to go a few weeks after 9/11 happened. But I'm glad I went, because Tokyo was amazing. I've been back a number of times since, and it may be my favorite city in the world. There's so much going on everywhere. So many people, so many trains, so much everything. But it's all incredibly well organized, and the whole city of 30 million seemed as clean as Disneyland.
There's a light going out tonight, driving fast.
Speaking of Disneyland, I went to Tokyo Disneyland one day. It was just like ours back home, but not the same.
It's too late now to say goodbye.
Like the pirates singing in Japanese on Pirates of the Caribbean. And the advisory to hang on to your hats and glasses, all in Japanese on Thunder Mountain.
When you were mine, we fell across the sky.
And they still had Country Bear Jamboree, but the bears were singing in Japanese.
Against the wall.
I'd never seen anything like Shibuya Crossing.
You're not the only one. Shadow from
One day I wanted to go explore my heritage. Well, not exactly. I went to the Ryogoku Sumo Stadium, where Chunky Brothers have been doing their thing since 1906.
the radio. Look up high.
I fit right in.
Now you're gone.
I had a great time in Tokyo before heading back to Iwakuni for the home stretch of my contract.
See it now in this fall.
In November, we had a going away party for Katie. She'd been a good friend over the year we taught together. She was replaced by a British guy named Daniel, who was very sad that he would be in Katie's apartment instead of my hostess club girl adjacent apartment. Tough break for him. The weather was cold again. I hung out with the Indonesians, including a few trips to Miyajima.
fell across the sky.
They were different than the Japanese women I hung out with most of the time. They were more, I don't know, playful.
Out there on the run. You're not the only.
Then, the time came for my going away party. I would miss the students I'd taught and the friends I'd made. People all over Iwakuni who had gone out of their way to help and be nice to a big goofy white boy on the other side of the world from home. The day I left Iwakuni was tough. I had a trip to Kyoto with Sarah planned before we flew home. It was cold and snowy in Kyoto, which seemed only appropriate. I was not sure what lay ahead of me back in California, and I was sad about who and what I was leaving in Iwakuni, with Eon, and in the Hotel California. Overall, I had a great time in Japan. Most days, it wasn't even like I had a job. I built so many memories, and Iwakuni will always be with me. Like it says in some song, you can check out anytime you want, but you can't ever leave.